Okay, fellow refiners and alchemists and gold enthusiasts. This video, actually these 3 videos that are coming meow, are all about how to turn mixed ICs or any kind of ICs that you might have access to into superfine powder, kind of talcum powder / cement consistency, and then in the end up with the familiar yellow stuff that we all like so much. This video is going to be broken up, or this series is going to be broken up into 3 videos. The first one will be where I discuss my progress through the various machines to turn ICs into dust. The first video we're going to be the machines that didn't work. This will help you avoid having to try them and spend the money that I did figuring out the reasons why they don't work. The second video is going to be about the machines that did work. I've got a couple of machines in my system here that work really well for turning ICs into clean dust in a reasonable amount of time. Obviously the whole objective here is that you don't want to be spending time doing it. And then the third video is going to be the whole process, as in start from scratch, running through all the machines, starting with this stuff that you're actually seeing right here and ending up with some more, hopefully, of this stuff that you're seeing there. So the reason that I went down this track is I quite like the gold recovery from e-waste thing, but I found that the problem for me personally with the whole process was that I was ending up doing, a day's work for a day's wage, which if I'm going to be doing that, I might as well sit inside and design circuit boards and write software rather than, be outside and making fires and, generally just putting a lot of hours into it. So yeah, that's what this video is going to be all about. If you find this information useful in this series of videos, there is a Bitcoin donation address in the details below. Please feel free to chuck me 10 cents or 50 cents or $1 or whatever you think the information might be worth to you. I think this is all fairly new information. I haven't seen any other videos on YouTube that go into this level, that you're really, like, I spent probably 2 months now getting things to this level, and so yeah, it'll save you a lot of time and hopefully be valuable to someone. So let's move right along to the machines that didn't work. Okay, so number 1 on our list of machines that didn't work is the standard off-the-shelf grain mill, Chinese made. Not too crap actually, all things considered. Fairly big thing. It's got its own stand. Came with a nice kind of funnel, big funnel to get all your stuff in there. And yeah, we'll quickly just have a look inside this. I'll show you how it works, and then I'll tell you why it didn't work in a moment. Okay, sorry, I was running a bit low on space there, so I thought I'd better come back to you. Okay, so this is the off-the-shelf grain mill. That thing was about, see if I can zoom out. No, I'll zoom out. That thing was about $400 that I put into it. I'm thinking, well, if you could put kind of grains at the top and get fine powder out the bottom, then that's kind of exactly what we want. That's what we're after with this game. So how this works, let's open this up. What you've got is a couple of blades there. I'll see if I can pull that out. Yeah, so it's got teeth like that, and that side has the same teeth, and your chips, or your grain really, is fed in through the middle, and these 2 sets of teeth rotate. You can adjust see if I can get that back one-handed. That's not too bad. Push that back. You can adjust the distance between the teeth there. So all in all, not actually a terrible machine. So the problems with it are many. Firstly, you don't really get fine enough powder out the bottom. It might be an okay machine actually for just smashing the bigger chips up, you know, so they turn into kind of slightly smaller chips before you actually run them through the machines that do work. But yeah, by itself, I would say don't spend the $400 and buy this or whatever it costs where you are. It's not worth it in terms of what we want to do with it. The only other issue that I found with this is that when you're running chips through it, they get stuck like everywhere. The chips do come out the bottom, but at the end of the day, you're going to have to take this whole thing apart and clear out the ½ kilo of various chips that are stuck in between things and behind things and all that kind of stuff. So that was machine one that I tried. This was the only off-the-shelf one, because at that point I still thought it would be fantastic if I could just buy something off the shelf and, you know, it does everything for me, and if it costs $400, well, that's not so bad. But yeah, my recommendation is don't go down this particular track. So let's move on to machine number two. Okay, so machine number two. For those of you who are relatively mechanically inclined, you will already have some idea where I'm going with this. I noticed that if I grab a chip IC in my hand, push it into a grinding wheel, you end up with really nice fine dust. I mean, super fine dust. And so I thought, well, that seems like it could be a winner. Let's buy a big grinder. So this time the experiment cost me a couple of $100. I think that's about a $200 grinder. This is a very big bench grinder, very powerful. So this thing is 520 watts with 200 millimeter wheels. So this is you know, on the plus side, I now own a very nice, powerful bench grinder, which I probably won't need another one in my life. But anyway, so I came up with an idea that kind of looked like this. I had a pipe that I cut the end off at probably 45 degrees or so, and I built a steel frame all around it. Now I've kind of dismantled all of this in the meantime. But the idea was basically remove this cover from the grinding wheel, bolt the grinding wheel to your frame, and then this thing would sit up against the grinding wheel like that. I hope that's visible for you guys. Yeah, you can kind of see it. It would sit up very close to the grinding wheel, you know, almost be touching. And the idea would be that you throw chips into the top of the tube here, and they have a catch pan of some description under the bottom. And you might even, you know, spray some water in there if you think that the whole thing would work a little bit better wet rather than dry. And the idea was that, yeah, you would end up with a bucket of powder. Now, as per the first machine that didn't work, this one also kind of half worked. The biggest problem that I found trying to grind using a grinding wheel like this, the chips fine, is that mixed ICs don't flow very well. If I filled up the pipe with really small ICs, the whole thing might have worked okay. But you chuck mixed ICs into this, and what ends up happening is they don't flow through the pipe. They just sit inside the pipe, and they sit up against the grinding wheel, and they basically just, you know, sit there all day with nothing really actually grinding away. And so yeah, it wasn't a massive success. It was pretty obvious to me at this point that that wasn't actually going to be the way to achieve this. And so I put the grinder back together, and I've got a nice bench grinder, and I've actually repurposed most of the frame for this thing, but I left this piece specifically so you guys can see what the idea was here, so you're not kind of trapped into going down the same route. If you can get something like this, maybe with a force being applied down onto the chips that would actually push them into the grinding wheel, this system might still have some merit. But I never got this working to the point where I got any serious amount of stuff out of it. So let me move on to the third machine that didn't work. I think the third machine is basically the last one that I didn't work before I managed to get something working. So we'll just have a quick look at that, and yeah, so I'll be back in a second. Okay, so try and contain your laughter at this point. but this is the third machine that didn't work. So what we've actually got here, seeing as I don't actually own a lathe, is we had a drill press, little baby drill press. It wasn't actually supported like this. I actually had it clamped in my proper bench vise. On my proper bench, I had it clamped around the pipe, around the main kind of shaft. And this was kind of based on a machine that I actually did see on YouTube. This one, there is a guy that has a lathe that does something similar like this and ends up with a bit of gold out of it. And so what this essentially used was this is a 10 millimeter 4-flute milling cutter. It's a face cutter, an end milling cutter, I think, side and end mill, I think this is called. And that's a 10 millimeter one. And the first stage of this, and then we've also got this thing here, which was, so obviously the cutter went in there. This thing here got G-clamped or got quick clamped onto there. And then you would adjust adjust the table in the drill so that for the first stage of this, the milling cutter would run inside that there. So that's about a 13 millimeters. So it's about 3 millimeters diameter bigger than the actual milling cutter. And I also kind of slotted out the top as best I could. This is a block of steel, so for someone without proper machine tools, this was a bit of a pain to make. But so it didn't cost very much at this stage of it, but took a bit of effort to make. And so you can see as I turn the milling cutter in there, as the drill would have done, and you feed ICs in through here, it would grab them, break them up, and push them out the end here, and you'd end up with bits of ICs in the 1 to 5 millimeter range that had been broken up, which was quite good. At this point I was trying to find my way. At this point I was kind of hand feeding them in, which was really the problem of this setup. And then on the other side I've got a 10 millimeter hole, so now that fits much better in there. You'll see that's a much better fit. And I actually had a funnel. Sorry, I'm trying to show this to you like that. I actually had a funnel feeding in the top. So this whole thing was set up like this there. And you could actually control the depth of the milling cutter by adjusting this. So it was actually relatively adjustable. And so you'd feed the small chips into the funnel, spin the milling cutter, and you would actually, depending on the position of the cutter in terms of in and out, you would actually end up with fairly fine powder at the end. And I actually did run, a couple of handfuls of chips through this thing by hand. And once I panned it, I did actually find some gold in there. So this is actually a working machine. So you can kind of see. And then the finer, like if you look at the end of a milling cutter, where the flutes reach the shaft there, you'll see that they taper off, and so you can actually control how fine you want the powder by how much of that taper you actually let out. So that actually works fairly well. You can actually turn all of your chips into like 1 or 2 millimeter powder quite easily, and then turn all your chips into like quite fine powder. Now there is, as I said, there is a guy that's done something like this on YouTube, although instead of showing what he was actually doing, he was basically selling plans for this kind of thing. So I didn't bother buying the plans. I kind of looked at it and figured it's probably going to be something like that. If you have access to a lathe, this might actually be worth your time looking into, because it might end up being a bit faster than the process that I ended up following that worked. But so this didn't really work for me, because I found that because I was still hand feeding things, that I was putting a lot of time still into this. Just running a couple of handful of chips through this setup took a fair while. So also not obviously the way that I would recommend to achieve this, but still a pretty reasonable solution. So what I'll do now, this is going to be the end of the, let's say partially the end probably of the machines that didn't work. What I'll quickly do is I'll set up and I'll show you a couple of machines that I actually have planned for the future. So even though I have a working machine now, I haven't really stopped wondering whether there are ways to speed this all up. So I'll show you what I've got planned, and then that should be the end of the video for part 1. Okay, so future machine number 1, not quite there yet, as you can see. is I've got an automatic gearbox out of a front wheel drive car, and automatic gearboxes inside them have a number of, might be 2 or 3 or 4 planetary gear sets. So planetary gear sets is the one where you've got the ring gear around the outside, and you've got a sun gear in the middle, and then you've got 3 or 4 planet gears, I guess, that when you rotate either the inside or the outside, the whole thing, all the gears kind of turn together. If you Google planetary gearbox, you'll see what I mean. And the idea with the planetary gearbox is that it might not give me the fine powder out, but it should be very strong, it should be hardened steel, and it should be quite good actually at breaking bigger chips up into smaller chips so they're ready for the final process. So that's definitely a machine that I still wanted to get that gearbox apart and have a look at that. And the next one is just the old familiar grain mill here. And now the nice thing here is the grain mill might not end up being that useful, but you do have a nice grunty electric motor that came with a stand, which is quite handy, and it's quite easy to bolt to the shaft here of the motor, or not the shaft, the motor itself. The shaft probably runs on the inside. But the idea here is to build a hammer mill. So if you Google DIY hammer mill, YouTube DIY hammer mill, you're going to see there are some guys who basically start out with a couple of bits of flat plate that they bolt to it, and they build little small scale hammer mills. And hammer mill would actually be a very fast, very good way of turning either big chips into small chunks of chips, or alternatively you could also turn those small chunks of chips into very fine powder relatively quickly. Hammer mills are basically the way that this is done industrially. You chuck rocks on the top and you get talcum powder out the bottom. So yeah, so that's also something that I might show at some point. So there's definitely going to be some welding and cutting to turn this, rather than a grain mill, turn it into a hammer mill. But yep, this is the end of part 1. Part 2 probably going to be released in a day or 3. Basically talking about the 2 machines, or the 2 processes that actually ended up working very well to turn the chips into dust. And then part 3 will be the whole process to start with chips and end up with gold, because I know there are some of you guys that like the long videos. Yep, I'll be back a little bit later. Good luck and be safe.